Microhistory. First of all, the meaning of the name. There are often misunderstandings concerning this name. Micro is supposed to be related to the either symbolic or actual dimension of the topic or of the objects. So saying, for instance, that microhistorians are particularly interested in marginal people, but this is not the case. In fact, the prefix micro is related to the microscope, so to an analytic approach to history. Actually, I've been responsible for a series called Microhistory, directed by Giovanni Levi and myself in the late 70s and 80s. And one of the first titles was a book of mine on Piero della Francesca, one of the greatest Italian painters, one of the greatest painters in the Western tradition. So the idea was to, in that case, to have an analytic approach to some paintings by a great painter. What came out from the analysis? Well, this is an open question. It has been questioned, but anyway. So, microhistory. This was a joint project which, let's say, was put forward by a group of Italian historians. But then in the late 70s, each of us, Giovanni Levi, Edoardo Grandi, Carlo Poni, myself, we, let's say, came to the project which implied a lot of conversations around the journal, Quaderni Storici, an Italian historical journal. But each of us came to this project with different interests. So my own approach to microhistory is different from Giovanni Levi's approach and so on. Interestingly, the project got a lot of attention from different countries. So there were different waves, which I would interpret it in a sort of geopolitical perspective. So there was first an interest in France, Germany, England. Then Mexico, for instance, South Korea, Iceland, Hungary. Now there is an international network of microhistorians led by a Hungarian historian and a historian from Iceland. Why did I say that microhistory, this geography has a geopolitical dimension? Well, I asked that question and to myself, and I think my answer is the following. It would be possible to subvert, using microhistory, a series of hierarchies which are in fact based on relationships which are related to politics, to, let's say, historical traditions. So, for instance, I mean, for everybody it's obvious that a topic related to French Revolution has a world impact, or everybody is in principle interested in this. But what about, let's say, a village in Iceland, a fisherman's village? Well, I think behind this subversion of the usual hierarchies, there is a dictum, this is my own interpretation, a dictum by Bronisław Malinowski, the great Polish-born anthropologist, then let's say he moved to the UK, and is usually regarded as the first, the founder of modern anthropology. And he once said, it's not such and such tribe which is important, but what is important are the questions we asked to any given tribe. In other words, it's the questions which are important. And I would add, what is relevant in microhistory is the possibility of having an intensive study of a case which would lead to a better generalization. So it's not the cult of the fragment as such. The fragment or the case, I would say, it's important because it can lead to further questions and even to a provisional generalizations. Now, paradoxically, a book of mine, which is called The Cheese and the Worms, which has been translated in many languages, including Russian, has been regarded as a sort of a typical example of microhistory. I say it paradoxically because, in fact, the book was published in 1976, and the discussions about microhistory started a few years later, in 78, 79, and so on. Certainly, retrospectively, I can look at my own book as an example of a research which can be regarded as leading to a sort of theorization of microhistory. After all, it's quite normal that theories come after facts or after, let's say, empirical explorations in a given direction. So in that case, I worked on an individual, a miller from Friuli in northeastern Italy, who was put on trial by the Roman Inquisition twice, and ultimately, at the end of the 16th century, he was put to death as an heretic. Now, I came across the trials against this man in the early 60s. I was working on a different project, which was also related to the Inquisition trials, to Friuli and so on. It was about witchcraft or counter-witchcraft. And I came across in a handwritten index of the first 1,000 trials which took place in Friuli, in the Friulian Inquisition, in an index which was written in the 18th century. So I read two references to trials against a man who believed that the world was born from rotten matter. And I was deeply intrigued by this idea, but at that moment I was unable to look at the trials. I had only that short description. But I took a note, and then later I was able to have a look at the trials, but then I was working on the other project on witchcraft, and after 7 years, I think, I started to work on that project, focusing on that miller, Domenico Scandella, nicknamed Menocchio. And I worked 7 years more, and then I published my book. The book was very successful. It has been translated into 26 languages. It's by far the most successful book I ever wrote. I asked myself why the book had such an immediate appeal. And I think the first answer is related to the person who is at the center of the book, the miller. He was an exceptional man. He was regarded as an exceptional person by the inhabitants of the village themselves. Actually, the inquisitors asked, "Is he crazy?" And they said, "No, he's not crazy, but he's very strange." And he makes strange speeches. I mean, he says strange things about a lot of different issues. So first, there is the man. Then there are the documents, and I think that, let's say, in those documents we have two topics which I put at the very center of my book, which have a sort of immediate appeal to, I would say, anybody from any given culture. Meaning, first, the challenge to religious and secular authorities. And secondly, the interaction between written culture and oral culture. Menocchio read books. I've been able to identify nearly all of them. He read more, but I mean, I started from the references he made in the trials to books he read, and I also explored the way in which he read those books. So I compared his accounts of a certain passage in a given book either unknown, nearly unknown, obscure tracts, or a famous book like Boccaccio's Decameron. So, I mean, his cultural background was extremely complex and unexpected. But he was approaching written books, printed books, from a background which was deeply impregnated with oral culture. So this is a kind of experience which can be shared by many people in different countries and so on. We have cases, case studies, and then if we look at a case intensively, if we take this microhistorical approach, we are confronted with a lot of much more general issues. Like, for instance, in the case I mentioned, the challenge to authority, or let's say ways of reading, and so on and so forth. It has been asked by an Italian historian, Francesca Trivellato, who teaches at Yale. And she wrote an article which is available on the web, asking herself, is my Italian microhistory helpful for a global approach to history? And actually I started from an answer which is yes. And I wrote an essay which came out in those very days. I haven't seen it physically. It's an essay which is included in the 6th volume of the Cambridge Wood History. And the title of my paper is Microhistory and World History. And so I tried to show how microhistory can be used in a world historical perspective. We are confronted with a phenomenon which is usually labeled globalization. And I think it's important to remember that this is not an event, but it's a long time process which started centuries ago. So nowadays, we are confronted with a situation in which more and more countries are involved in, let's say, exchanges, either cultural or think about the web and so on. So each of us, we could say, is involved in a series of exchanges and contexts and networks, which would have been inconceivable even 20 years ago. So I think that, let's say, historians are asked to deal with this situation, asking new questions to the past. And I think that microhistory can be an extremely helpful tool in order to deal with this growing, expanding world, which implies new questions to the past. We are submerged by data. And the problem is how to deal with this enormous mass of data. How it's possible to use the web. And I've been confronted with this question myself, and I tried to teach my students, working on specific cases, how it's possible to navigate in order to find something which is not only an answer to our questions, but also the possibility of asking new questions on the basis of unexpected findings. So using the web as a tool for research, and research implies looking for the unknown and finding the unknown. So not only answers to our questions.